You may be seated. I'm about to turn the lights down a little bit because instead of a typical sermon, we've got a temple talk today. And I was just thinking, for those of you who are visitors today, you won't get a typical worship service today or a typical sermon. But if you were wondering what we're all about, you're about to get maybe more information than you needed. But the reasons for this temple talk is that the Vision Council of our congregation has spent a few months taking up some important conversations and has made a couple of critical decisions that affect our modes of being here at First Lutheran, and I think that they are exciting ones to be sure, but they are changes. And for those of you who remember, I think over these last couple of years especially, I've just been trying to tell anybody in leadership positions, sometimes I've said it here in the sanctuary or from the pulpit, anybody that would listen, hey, the church in the United States is changing. Religion in the United States is changing and changing rapidly. So let's get ready for adaptation and experimentation. Because I'm not necessarily reflecting on these as the golden years of church history, but from a sociological perspective, there was a major period of stability for the Christian church in the United States from about post-World War II through the early 1990s, maybe mid-90s. And sociologists referred to that time period as a moment of American Christendom, where faith was sort of a given. And in the last decade, 2 decades and a half, we've seen sharp decline in religious affiliation and a lot of changes in behavior for people who have remained religiously affiliated. We've seen a lot of change in their behavior in terms of how they engage institutions of faith. And we are now in a moment of what sociologists call post-American Christendom. And so we are seeing the behaviors of congregations change within our walls, and we are seeing culture change outside of our walls. So change is everywhere. And that's what this temple talk takes up. It takes up 2 pilot programs that are going to be experimental in nature. Operative word is experimental, so maybe not forever, maybe temporary, but experimental modes of being at First Lutheran. So I'm going to get into presenting the agenda here for the temple talk and discuss these two pilots that we're going to move forward with. But first, we're going to found the whole thing on a deep dive, get into the weeds a little bit about how the landscape of First Lutheran Church in Detroit Lakes has been changing. I think you'll find some interesting numbers that I'm about to present. And the good news is as I'm giving a lot of verbiage to change, almost none of our change here at First Lutheran Church in recent years is decline. In some cases, and in many cases, it's sustained or it's growth. We're just shifting in our way of being so rapidly and significantly. So most of the changing landscape of First Lutheran Church has actually been growth, but there's just a lot of difference compared to whom we've always been. So we are going to introduce 2 pilots here. The pastoral pilot, Pastor Matthew and I, are going to have revisited where we should be focusing our pastoral energies given the changing landscape of First Lutheran Church. And we've got a pilot proposal for how we will engage our pastoral leadership with respect to the way the community has changed. And we have a worship pilot, restructuring Sunday worship. And I'll tell you what that means, but I'll keep you on the edge of your seat until we get to number 3, all right? So we'll start off with some data. This is interesting, but this is just general weekly attendance average at First Lutheran Church since 2019. 2019 is there intentionally because it's a pre-COVID year, right? So our average weekly attendance at First Lutheran Church, and you can't see these numbers probably, but I'll let you know what they are. Our average weekly attendance in 2019 was 304 in person. COVID hits, and we have this seismic shift to our way of being for in-person worship, right? Average worship attendance goes from 304 down to 182 and 175 for those 2 peak years of COVID. And thank God we experienced a rebound in the years out of COVID. In 2022, 268 in-person weekly attendance became the average. 2023, we rose again to 299 weekly attendance average. And as we close the books on the calendar year of 2024, we averaged 322 people a week for weekly worship services in person. So we're experiencing a bounce back, growth. In fact, you could even argue that in-person the facts are right in front of us, I guess. 322 people is more than 304, so we have surpassed pre-COVID numbers, although our average in 2018 was 352. So we're not quite back to that late teens era. But attendance weekly on the rise, right? And now this next graph is fascinating to me. This next graph estimates online worship attendance since 2018. It's a really elusive number, but we've used the same metric in analyzing this data for every year. So these numbers might not be exactly precisely accurate, but the trend is precise and accurate. It captures a trend. Online worship attendance since 2018 for First Lutheran Church in DL. 2018, we averaged 28 viewers a week for online worship. 2019, we averaged 40 viewers online per week. Obviously, COVID hits, and by necessity, we averaged 300 online viewers a week during COVID. And then a peak year again in 2021, we have a lot of hybrid worship anyway, and still there are some restrictions there upon worship, but online worship went down to 176 per week. But here's what I think is fascinating. Look at that line and how sustained it is for 4 years out of COVID. Each one of those numbers is slightly over 100. 122 in 22, 105 in 2023, 109 in 2024. So in other words, friends, First Lutheran Church, a whole online worship community was born post-COVID and sustained. 100+ worshipers virtually every week. So you might be asking yourself, where have the Sunday worshipers gone? This would be a partial answer to that question. The good news is they're still worshiping, but they've shifted to almost exclusively online and in a sustained way. So that's where some of our online Sunday worshipers have gone. Now here's where some of our Sunday worshipers have gone next. This next slide. This one is a fascinating slide as well because you can see it kind of rises almost off the charts there. So pre-2021, my understanding was that on Wednesday nights, there was a 10 to 15 minute, or maybe longer, sort of devotional moment, and then kids would get dispersed out to Wednesday school and confirmation. Well, in 2021, we decided we were going to try a full worship service, but abridged to a half an hour. So communion, offering, the same sermon from Sunday, and song and prayer. Half hour. So we offered a full worship option on Wednesdays in 2021. Well, this is the graph for Wednesday worship at 6 p.m. 101 in the programmatic year that ended 2022 was the average. Programmatic year that ended in 2023 was 122. Programmatic year that ended in 2024, so last spring, the average rose to 150 every Wednesday. And this past fall, 191 was our average on Wednesday evenings. Now that's a little bit of a eye-popping number because fall tends to be the most attended period for Wednesday night worship, so that number will likely come down with spring averages. But you see the trend. So you might go, where have Sunday worshipers gone? The good news is they haven't left entirely for the most part. They're worshiping online or they're worshiping on Wednesday. These are seismic shifts in a matter of 4 years for your community. So with that being the changing landscape of FLC attendance, well, I guess I have a few more graphs to show is, okay, for those who are, if we were to exclude the online community for just a moment for the data, what is the share, what is the weekly share of in-person worship, Sunday versus Wednesday? Well, in 2022, 63% of our weekly worshipers did worship on Sunday. In 2023, that went down a little bit. 61% of our weekly worshipers worshiped on Sunday. Calendar year 2024 closes, 54% of our worshipers weekly worship on Sunday, 46% worship on Wednesday. So we are becoming almost a half and half community for people who have a Sunday-centric model for engaging congregational life versus a Wednesday-centric model for engaging congregational life. So much has changed, right? In a handful of years, and we're trying to keep up. And the good news is again, we're experiencing growth in numbers, but just change in how people operate. So much has changed, but what hasn't in this time period? Our pastoral structure, the way we are focusing our energies. And worship structure hasn't really changed in 4 years, despite seismic shifts in the congregational behavior. So therefore, from a position of strength and momentum, it's time to experiment with adaptation. Pastoral pilot, restructuring our emphases, and worship pilot, restructuring Sunday services. Pastoral pilot. I'm going to give you the what is it, how does it break down, why are we doing it, and hopefully I've answered most of that just through the data, and when does this pastoral restructuring begin? Well, the what of it is this. Pastors are going to adjust their foci and their emphases relating to congregational life. I, as lead pastor, am going to maintain a comprehensive ministry focus. I have indirect or direct oversight over all ministries, and that'll largely stay the same. Whereas Pastor Matthew will have the larger and more significant adjustment. He'll move to a weekday ministry focus. If 50% of our congregation is engaging outside of a Sunday-centric model, perhaps 50% of our pastors should be as well. And here's how that breaks down. Again, I stay largely the same, so this is way too small of writing and way too much information that I can probably summarize in a sentence. So clearly I indulged myself on Thursday when I was preparing this, but my Sunday leadership will stay the same, my weekly schedule will stay the same, my admin ministry will stay the same, I'm direct oversight over personnel, things HR, business admin, stuff like that. My community presence will maintain. I'll do my best to continue to be out in the community, visible, engaging with where our congregation is active out in the community, whether it be in community organizations or going to recitals or games, etc. Adult education, my teaching will remain roughly the same for adults. Fellowship ministry, roughly the same. YFM ministry, roughly the same. Pastor Matthew and I are already co-leading confirmation and co-teaching confirmation, and we're also co-leading some of the high school youth ministries. Where the bigger change is my visitation ministry will adjust to decrease, and Pastor Matthew will take over visitation ministry. All right? So, Pastor Matthew's adjustments are a little bit more significant. He will move to a once a Sunday leadership model, or one Sunday a month leadership model. So my preaching will increase and my leadership will maintain on Sundays, but Pastor Matthew will move to once a month Sunday model with occasional exceptions like Easter Sunday and high holy days. His weekly schedule will adjust from Monday through Friday, and his community presence, which he's already been ramping up, his time at people's recitals, his engagement with community events, his engagement with young people's sporting events, etc. That's already ramping up. He's doing that anywhere from 1 to 3 nights a week. So now we're going to maintain that, but it's going to be a sustainable leadership model now. Because if we unhook him from Sunday energies, he can really live into that in a more healthy rhythm. His adult education ministry, he'll remain the main pastor over adult education. And fellowship ministry, we've tasked Pastor Matthew with that as well. Now he'll have, again, a more sustainable model to engage theology on tap. 2, 3, 4 fellowship events that happen on weekdays and on weeknights. All right? And again, his youth and family ministry leadership will remain the same, but again, sustainably. Pastor Matthew is taking kids on retreats. He's going to have lock-ins on the weekend. If we want it to be sustainable, we've got to unhook him a little bit from a Sunday-centric model to engage in the community. And it's one of my favorite parts about Pastor Matthew's gifts, seeing him out there in the community, developing relationships, supporting our kids, supporting our organizations, and we've just got to unhook him so it's a sustainable model. Now, you might think, well, are we going to see less of Pastor Matthew? On Sundays, yes. But with him getting visitation and adult education, he remains a comprehensive leader to all of you. He will take a larger share of funeral ministries and a larger share of visitation ministries, and he leads adult ed. So he remains pastor to all people, just different emphases, okay? So, pastoral pilot, why? Again, changing landscape. We're no longer an exclusively Sunday-centric model congregation. We're going to adjust our pastors to experiment, to respond to that. We also think that through strategic planning a few years ago and through the movement and forum, adult forum on growing young, if we want to go full throttle into these investments to grow young, to achieve strategic planning goals, then we've got to restructure our pastoral responsibilities. So we hope that we have a higher chance of achieving our goals by doing this. And then again, we do it in a sustainable way, okay? When does this take place? Effective today through June 30th, the end of the fiscal year, where this model will take place. Evaluation of the pilot at the June Vision Council meeting will also take place, and we'll see if it was a success or a failure or needs some tweaks. But we're excited about this. I'm excited to have a community that's willing to adapt. I'm excited to have a community that's flexible and nimble to try to stay the course to the best possible healthy community and faithful community that we can be. And we do it from a position of strength and growth. That's what's exciting, not desperation or fear. On that, I spoke enough. Pastor Matthew will now move you into the worship pilot.
All right. As I said, the first service, I should be quicker than Pastor Joe because he just gets amped up in a good way, which is your gift. Since you gave me compliments, there's your compliment. So restructuring of Sunday services. Again, I'll do the what, the why, the how, and the when, as Pastor Joe kind of did, but a lot of that has been kind of named already. But the what is that we are going to be moving to a single Sunday service, and that will take place at 9:30 a.m. with 10:30 a.m. fellowship, education hour, Sunday school. Everything we would do after or in between the two services is still happening. It's just happening after our one service. And I know that's probably a bigger change for you all because it's an hour and 15 minutes earlier than it is for the 8:30 who can, I don't know, they're already up, so I don't know what they can do whatever they want for an hour. But we're moving forward just a little bit, but it was a good compromise, and that was about an hour adjustment for both services. The why, again, all the attendance data that Pastor Joe named, I won't go into that. The only thing I'll add to that is in the church industry, we kind of look at 70% as the number of capacity that you kind of say, that's the number. If we are at 70% or more consistently, we should look at a second service. But if we're at below 70% capacity, then we don't need two services. We could do one service. And so we are currently, if you add everything together, when we add both Sunday averages of both 8:30 and the 10:45, we are roughly about 54% to 57% capacity. And so we've got lots of room to still welcome guests among us, to still have big days, big celebrations, or big worship services where we fill the whole space and with room for that. We have a volunteer shortage. We have a ton of really great volunteers, but we have actually not filled a Sunday volunteer a Sunday service of volunteers since before Thanksgiving. We've either had Pastor Joe and I jump in, or we have many of you will see, oh, there's no usher, or oh, there's no whatever. So you'll slide into that role, which helps, but we actually have not had a full slate of volunteers since before Thanksgiving. And so to not burn out our wonderful volunteers, we also want to move to one to allow a greater pool to pull from so that people are able to worship a little bit more rather than show up thinking they're going to worship and then they're like, oh, I should probably usher or do something like that. In addition to our altar guild and some of the other ministries and our worship band, it's helpful to just not burn out all those ministries. Increased worship and fellowship opportunities. So fellowship especially, you either got to come early or you got to stay later to kind of worship in between. And so having a one service and we all flow into fellowship together is a little bit better, we think, in addition to increased worship opportunities, which include all music types. And so we are going to be experimenting with, the choir will be performing the same amount of times they perform, both Bell Choir and the Jubilate Choir. The worship band will still be at every service. We'll still have traditional hymns on the organ and the piano at every single service. And so it actually, as worship planners, we kind of get excited because now all of a sudden we've got all this different musical expressions to experiment with, which you all are already kind of used to, because if you see, our song of the day after the sermon has been a hymn the last little while. So you're already kind of blended in that way. But now we can do it even more. And maybe all of a sudden the choir and the band get to participate together on a song. So we just see it as increased worship opportunities and what we can offer and what we can do together. Uh-oh. The button's not working anymore, Jay. Might have to advance it for me. Or is there somebody behind the screen? Oh, there's someone else up there. If you just want to bump it forward one, unless the whole screen froze, in which case I will wing it. I'll wing it for now. All right, so the only other thing that's really coming up on the why, from what I can remember without being prompted, is also to just take our administrative energy as a staff and kind of put it into one service. Right now we're kind of being split to do specific little differences that each service has between Wednesday and Sunday, and both Sunday services, to take that energy and to just put it all into one. In addition to myself and Pastor Joe, we meet with Karen every single week on Tuesdays to plan worship, to go over each and every worship service and plan what we're doing for that week, musically, liturgically, and so it just allows us to kind of hone those energies in a little bit more into just the one service on Sundays. And my clicker's back. Sweet. So again, the difference between this pilot and the pilot that Pastor Joe was talking about, we're doing both, but the dates are slightly different. So obviously you're here at 10:45 service, so we did not start that today. We're going to start this on February 23rd. That's in 3 weeks. So that gives us time. All the choirs and musicians know, Altar Guild knows, all those folks know. But that way we can also reach out to the radio and to the TV station that plays our services and make sure everything is taken care of so that when we start on that date, everybody knows we're doing the one service at 9:30. And then this will go through May 18th instead of through June, like Pastor Joe had said for the other pilot. That is because come summer, we are maintaining the exact same summer schedule. We will still have 2 services on Sunday, the 8:30 traditional indoors and then the 10:30 contemporary outdoors. Numbers actually go up in the summer. Folks come back, and we have folks that are dropping in. So numbers go up, which dictate, we have enough for 2 services, plus they're different enough, right, and in very different settings. So that will be maintained Memorial Day through Labor Day as usual. And as I said, blended service musically, we're really excited about that. In terms of logistical adjustments, as you kind of think of things like, I wonder if they thought of this, or I wonder if they thought of that, I just kind of hold on to that until February 23rd. The staff have kind of gone through and done our bullet points of, like I said, radio, TV station, all the people we have to let know, our website, and all the things that we have to adjust for these services. But then come the 23rd, if you notice something as we start this one service, and you're like, ooh, that got missed, let us know so that we, there will be a little bit of a growing period here as we experiment with this. And again, the Vision Council will evaluate this along with the other pilot at the June meeting.
Well, just to finally wrap this up, of course there's some loss to this, right? Because it's change. We are losing, I guess, an exclusively contemporary worship service, right? And we are losing a time of maybe the morning that you prefer. And I just want to acknowledge that. That is the bummer of change. We're going to experiment with this, but I also want to invite us each to opening our minds and hearts to being, okay, what do we gain from this? And the summary points of both pilots are, hopefully we gain appropriate and sustainable pastoral investment with Pilot 1, and with Pilot 2, hopefully we gain a more energized worship, a closer-knit community, and bolstered ministries all around. And now we enter into the dangerous invitation of public questioning. We only had one question at the first service, and that question was, wait, are we doing away with Sunday school? And I said, there are some churches that the numbers don't allow for Sunday school any longer, but we're not at that point yet. We are always evaluating it. Sunday school continues as usual in this pilot. Any questions before I wrap us up for good on the temple talk here? Well, I appreciate Paul's letter to the Corinthians today, to a community of his that was divided. And to borrow his verbiage, I would say whether we have one service on a Sunday or 2, whether we have contemporary music or traditional music, whether we have a bell choir, a worship band, and a jubilate choir, all of it means nothing if we don't have love. So we move forward in this pilot in the love of God and hopefully with the love of one another. Thank you so much. On that, I invite, all right. That was very kind of you to clap. The 8:30 people did not clap. But to their credit, I saw multiple people silent clap. Very cultural difference between our people. I can't wait to see you worship together. We continue with our song of the day.